As we've been reporting, the Supreme Court says it will decide whether former President Donald Trump is entitled to broad immunity from federal prosecution for acts he allegedly committed while in office. The High Court agreed to expedite the case and hear arguments in April. That's almost a month after statewide Republican nominating convention in Michigan and Super Tuesday, the largest single day of primary season. For more on this, Major Garrett joins me from Washington. Major, seen a lot in Washington, but this is new, very new. Just give me your take on this decision and what we have before us.
So you mentioned the word expedited. Yes, it's expedited by the understood calendar operations of the Supreme Court, but it's not expedited based on the request of Special Prosecutor Jack Smith. This is a delay, and the delay, depending on how long the Supreme Court takes to write its opinion in this very consequential case, could make a criminal trial of former President Trump almost impossible before the 2024 election. And if former President Trump is reelected and he becomes the head of the presidency, the head of the administration, and thereby the Justice Department, there's every reason to believe, John, that the case will be dismissed by his order. So yes, the Supreme Court is moving a bit faster than it otherwise would, but that pace still makes a trial for the former president on a very consequential matter that many believe the public should have a verdict on before the election ever more difficult, if not impossible. Not entirely impossible, much more complicated. Just imagine it, John. A criminal trial on events leading up to January 6, 2021, either during the Republican National Convention in July, the Democratic National Convention in August, or when the traditional start of the campaign has already begun sometime around Labor Day. It is almost unimaginable. And the former president and his legal team know that. And they got more from the Supreme Court today than did Jack Smith.
Explain that to people who may not be as familiar with delay as a tactic and as maybe arguably the tactic for the Trump legal team across all of his legal proceedings. Explain how that is not just a good thing that happened to the former president, but kind of the thing he's been banking on.
One of the great blessings of our country, John, are due process rights to every defendant. And former President Trump, by any estimation, is not any defendant. He's a former president of the United States and the leading candidate for the Republican Party nomination to return to the presidency. That doesn't create necessarily a legally important aura around him, but all courts operate in a political environment, a political atmosphere. And the president's attorneys have known since this case was brought that their number one tactical advantage was exercising every due process right to push this closer and closer to the election, to make the possibility of that trial, should it come, almost impossible to carry out because of that election. And there's a secondary component to this. The former president likes to say, because he's the leading candidate for the Republican nomination, he should not be prosecuted under any circumstances, meaning political success immunizes you from civil or criminal procedures. That's never been asserted before in American life, but it's taking hold because of the special attachment that Trump supporters have to the former president, and he to they.
So let me ask you as the final question, Major. Is there a way in which this might not be so great for the former president, which is to say, if it doesn't get adjudicated in the courts, it then gets adjudicated in the campaign, and there's a lot of footage from January 6th. Those flags are all Trump flags. His question of immunity might strike some voters, independents or otherwise, that maybe it is a little broad, that keeping January 6th at the center of it and the president's continued insistence, though it's a lie, that he won the last election, that might not be such a great thing to have center stage all the way up through November.
That's a very good point, John. And legal tactics are those that are employed by lawyers to keep any defendant out of prison. But they're not necessarily applicable and universally successful in a political context. Anyone who's watched this campaign knows that former President Trump has won more than he's lost so far in these legal battles in the political arena. But to your point, everything that he has done as president will be on the ballot in November if he's the Republican nominee, especially everything related to January 6, 2021. Whether he's being prosecuted in a federal courtroom here in Washington, D.C., or a candidate who doesn't have to fear that, but has to answer the political question to the broader American public, it will be front and center. So he may have won a tactical legal victory, but he cannot avail himself of complete immunity from the political conversation that will redound around everything he did as president, especially around January 6th.
Major Garrett in Washington. Thank you so much, Major.